What if everything you know about the 1996 NBA Finals is wrong? Michael Jordan, Finals MVP, case closed, right? Except here's the thing nobody wants to talk about. The opposing coach literally said Dennis Rodman was the MVP of the game too. The opposing superstar admitted Rodman, not Jordan, beat them. And a Chicago Tribune columnist argued Rodman had a better Finals MVP case than Jordan. What I'm about to show you will completely change how you think about one of the most famous championship series in NBA history.
I think there's no question he was the MVP for their game tonight. His offensive rebounding hurt us.
Okay, we need to talk because I've been going through the 1996 Finals coverage, and I mean really going through it like Charlie Day with the conspiracy board in It Is Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I've discovered something absolutely wild. This whole time, we've been telling the wrong story about the 1996 Finals. And before you start typing angry comments about how I'm disrespecting his airness, just hear me out. This isn't some contrarian hot take designed to generate clicks. This is what actually happened when you dig past surface level narratives and look at what the players, coaches, and media were actually saying at the time. This is the story of how Dennis Rodman psychologically destroyed the Seattle SuperSonics using methods that had nothing to do with traditional basketball, and why the wrong guy got the trophy. Here's the thing about the 1996 Finals that nobody talks about anymore. They weren't just basketball games. They were a full-blown cultural event that would make the Kardashians jealous. Over 200 credentialed media members from 40 countries descended on Chicago. To put that in perspective, the 93 Finals had just 75 international commentators. This was basketball as global theater, and guess who was the main character? Bob Dole. Yeah, Bob Dole showed up to Game 2 and declared himself a Michael Jordan fan, which is hilarious because while Dole was praising Jordan, the game was actually being won by a guy who looked like he just walked out of a rave in Ibiza. The media had built this up some kind of cultural clash. Seattle's latte-sipping sophistication versus Chicago's blue-collar shot and a beer mentality. Coffee versus beer. Grunge versus house music. The Pacific Northwest's chill vibe against the Midwest work ethic. But what they completely missed was that Dennis Rodman was operating on an entirely different level. While everyone else was playing basketball, Rodman was conducting a psychological experiment that would make Stanley Milgram jealous. Cindy Crawford interviewed Rodman for MTV's House of Style. She said he was the catalyst for all the action. A supermodel was calling a basketball player the most interesting person in the building. That should tell you everything about who was really driving this narrative. The Sonics never stood a chance because they were playing the wrong game entirely.
But I'm being productive. At 35 years old, I play like I'm 20 years old.
June 5th, 1996, United Center, Game 1 of the NBA Finals, and the psychological war began before the opening tip. Now, here's where this gets interesting on multiple levels, because Phil Jackson wasn't just throwing Rodman onto court and hoping for chaos. This was calculated psychological warfare with a very specific strategic purpose. Jackson said before the series, "We'd like Dennis to play Kemp a lot, but it can't be steady diet for Dennis." Translation, we are going to use our psychological weapons strategically, not randomly. This is chess, not checkers. But Jackson had identified something crucial about Seattle's psychology that goes way deeper than X and O's. George Karl had recently overcome drinking problems and admitted his temper was a weakness, and it was my ego too. This wasn't just a basketball scouting, this was psychological profiling. And then there's Frank Rikowski. The newspapers had identified him as Seattle's enforcer, their designated tough guy whose job was to neutralize Rodman. Multiple preview articles mention him as a key factor. Here's a guy who was supposed to be Seattle's answer to everything, and Rodman clearly did his homework. The officials were so concerned about what might happen that they called 56 fouls and 5 technical fouls in Game 1 alone. 56 fouls. They knew they were dealing with something unprecedented. It is like if the WWE hired Navy SEALs as referees because they were worried the match might get out of hand.
And that they have Dennis Rodman, who cheats all over the court all the time, be rewarded for acting and flopping, and then let him laugh at us, laugh at the league, laugh at the referee, taunt our bench, and not be punished.
Dennis Rodman showed up about 2 hours before the game with fresh hair that looked like he'd been dipped in a bag of Skittles, while other players were going through their pre-game routines. Rodman was making a fashion statement that would rattle opponents before they even touched the ball. Then came the systematic destruction of Frank Brickowski, and I'm using the word systematic very deliberately here, because this was a random chaos. This was surgical. 2 technical fouls, ejection. Seattle's enforcer eliminated in the first game through pure psychological manipulation. But here's where it gets really diabolical. Jack Haley, Rodman's teammate and supposed friend of Brickowski, twisted the knife. He called me for Bulls ticket 2 days ago. Shows you what kind of friends we are. I didn't give him any. Haley is using their personal friendship to humiliate Brickowski on national television. Brickowski's response? You're out there to play basketball, not act like you're getting fouled. But that is exactly the point. Rodman had already changed the rules of engagement. The psychological impact was immediate. Seattle's committed 18 turnovers to Chicago's 8, 5 turnovers by Shawn Kemp alone in the first half. A team that had been mentally composed all season was suddenly making unforced errors like they were playing their first pickup game. And this was just the beginning of Seattle's psychological collapse. Game 2, June 7th. This is where Dennis Rodman entered basketball immortality and broke Seattle's will to live simultaneously. 11 offensive rebounds, 11, tying the NBA Finals record set by Elvin Hayes in 1979. But this wasn't just some historical footnote. Every time Seattle thought they had stopped a Bulls possession, here comes this rainbow-haired maniac appearing like Beetlejuice to give Chicago another chance to score. In a finals where 3 games were decided by single digits, those extra possessions were literally the difference between championship and catastrophic failure. Vincent Askew, Seattle's guard, said, "Rodman killed us. Not Jordan, not Pippen. Rodman killed them." But wait, it gets better. With 1.1 seconds left and the Bulls clinging to a 92-88 lead, who made the clutch free throw that sealed the victory? Dennis Rodman. While Jordan struggled from the line going 7 of 11, Rodman delivered in the moment that matters the most. And here's where this gets absolutely insane. George Karl, the opposing coach, said after the game, "There is no question he was the MVP of the game. His offensive rebound effort, his offensive rebounds hurt us. A lot of possessions, the momentum of the game, the style of the game, and even the scoreboard might have changed." Read that again. The opposing coach is literally making the Finals MVP case for Dennis Rodman. This would be like Bill Belichick after losing the Colts saying, "Yeah, Peyton was good, but their punter really beat us." Detlef Schrempf put it even more bluntly, Rodman's offensive rebounds at the end killed us. He got 3 offensive rebounds that broke our backs. They are not talking about Jordan breaking their backs, they are talking about rebounds. Rebounds, breaking their psychological will to compete. By game 2, it was clear that Seattle wasn't just losing basketball games. June 9th, Seattle Key Arena, the Sonics home court, their last stand. This should have been where Seattle fought back, where the home crowd lifted them, where they showed some pride. Instead, what happened was the most thorough psychological dismantling in finals history. Seattle attempted just 60 field goals. 60, the lowest in NBA Finals history. The previous record was 66. This was a team so mentally broken they couldn't even get decent shots. But Rodman wasn't satisfied with just breaking players. He was going after the coaching staff now. In the middle of the finals game, he walked over near the Seattle bench and started trash-talking George Karl directly. I said, "George, I know you're a great coach, but you got to teach your boys again how to play defense again." In the middle of an NBA Finals game, Dennis Rodman was giving coaching advice to the opposing coach. This is like if Tom Brady walked over to the other sideline during the Super Bowl and started critiquing the defensive coordinator's play calling. Then came up the coup de grace. Frank Brickowski ejected for the second time in 3 games. Same tactics, same result. This poor guy was like a cartoon character running into the same brick wall over and over again. Brickowski completely helpless. I am baffled by it. I don't know what you can do if he is going to be allowed to flop and get away with it. That is a broken man admitting he has no answer for what Rodman is doing to him. It is like watching someone try to explain how to get scammed by a 3-card Monte dealer. The defining image of the series is Dennis Rodman shrugging at Frank Brickowski like he was dealing with a toddler having a tantrum. Gary Payton, who was supposed to be Seattle's fury leader, they're just championship team. With Michael Jordan, it just make them better. They're teaching us a lesson. A team that never lost 3 straight games all season was now talking like they were grateful just to be here. After 3 games, it was clear that Dennis Rodman hadn't just outplayed Seattle, he had psychologically destroyed them.
But they don't understand though, you can't mess with the master. You can't mess with the master.
But here's where this gets really interesting and where our thesis gets its strongest proof. Because what happened in games 4 and 5 shows exactly how crucial Rodman's psychological dominance was. Game 4, for the first time in 5 days, Seattle finally broke free from Rodman's psychological grip. George Karl said it perfectly. The energy of the game this time was initiated by us, not Chicago. When Seattle wasn't being mentally rattled, they shot 58% from the field while Chicago managed only 40%. Shawn Kemp had his best game with 25 points. Gary Payton finally looked like an all-star he was supposed to be. Game 5, the Tribune's coverage was devastating for our argument in the best way possible. This time Dennis Rodman wasn't talking. When Rodman's psychological warfare was neutralized, the Bulls immediately fell apart. 3 for 26 from the 3-point range, missing 20 straight 3-pointers at one stretch. Jordan scored only 2 points in the 4th quarter. This isn't coincidence. When Seattle wasn't mentally broken by Rodman's antics, they could focus on proper defensive rotations and contest shots effectively. The pattern was crystal clear. Bulls win games 1-3. Rodman neutralized. Bulls lose games 4 and 5. Game 6 was where Dennis Rodman reasserted his psychological dominance and delivered the championship. During a crucial 3rd quarter stretch, Rodman scored 5 points, grabbed an offensive rebound, and drew a charge. The Tribune noted, "During the 3rd quarter, you would have sworn there were 3 or 4 Rodmans playing for the Bulls. 19 rebounds, 11 offensive rebounds. Bulls out-rebounded Seattle 53-35. And then came George Karl's final, devastating admission, the quote that proves our entire thesis. Dennis Rodman won 2 games. We could control Dennis Rodman 4 games, but games 2 and tonight, 19 rebounds, 11 offensive rebounds." Think about what George Karl said. He is literally breaking down the series for us. The opposing coach just gave us the perfect statistical breakdown of why Dennis Rodman was the real Finals MVP. But the smoking gun comes from the opposing superstar, Shawn Kemp's confession that nobody talks about. Michael Jordan didn't beat us. Dennis Rodman is the one who beat us. When the opposing superstar admits you were the reason they lost, maybe we should take that seriously. Here's what makes this argument bulletproof. I'm not making this up decades later with the benefit of hindsight and revisionist history. The people who were there, watching every possession, taking notes, filing stories on deadline, they were saying this stuff at the time. Bob Verdi, writing for the Chicago Tribune during the series. Had he not played perfectly, Rodman had an equal chance with Jordan to be the most valuable player of the finals, maybe better. A mainstream Chicago columnist was making the finals MVP case for Rodman in real time. This wasn't some Seattle homer trying to cope with losing. This was a Chicago reporter covering for the Bulls for the hometown paper. The circus atmosphere that Rodman thrived in was unprecedented. This was like if Coachella decided to host a basketball tournament. Dennis Rodman was partying with Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam before games, staying out all night while maintaining peak performance. While Seattle was trying to focus on basketball fundamentals and team meetings, Rodman was living like a rock star and still dominating the most important games of the season. The United Center sold 2,833 standing room only tickets for each home game. People were paying money to stand for 3 hours just to witness this cultural phenomenon. Every extra person in the building made the circus atmosphere more intense, and every increase in intensity favored Rodman's skill set. Phil Jackson said, "We sensed an opportunity to gasp this series in Game 3 on the road. You have to have a certain focus. You have to have a certain killer instinct." But it wasn't Jordan providing that killer instinct on the road. It was Rodman's psychological warfare that was silencing the hostile crowds and breaking opposing teams' will to compete. Evidence was overwhelming then, and it is overwhelming now. So why did Jordan win the Finals MVP if Rodman was the real difference maker? 11 votes total. Jordan 6, Kemp 3, Rodman 2. But here's the thing that should bother anyone who cares about basketball analysis. Rodman had a legitimate case for all 11 votes based on actual impact on winning. The answer is simple: narrative inertia and voter fatigue. Jordan was the obvious choice, the safe choice, the choice that makes sense according to traditional basketball wisdom. Voters see 27.3 points per game and think Finals MVP, because that is how we have always evaluated basketball greatness. But Rodman's impact was completely unconventional: record-breaking rebounding, clutch moments, systematic elimination of opposing players through ejections, stuff that doesn't show up in traditional box scores but absolutely shows up in wins and losses. It is like if Jaws had won the best picture over Rocky because everyone focused on the shark without noticing that the real story was about this small-town police chief overcoming his fear of water. Sometimes the most important character isn't the most obvious one. Bob Verdi wasn't some Seattle homer. When the hometown paper is making your opponent's argument, maybe you should listen. 28 years later, we are still talking about the 1996 Bulls as the greatest team ever. The 72-win season, the dominance, the cultural impact, but we've been crediting the wrong player for what made them truly unstoppable. Michael Jordan was spectacular. Scottie Pippen was crucial. Phil Jackson was brilliant. But Dennis Rodman was the X factor that turned that potentially competitive finals into a psychological rout. And if we are being honest about what actually happened during those 6 games in June 1996, if we are willing to let evidence speak for itself rather than relying on outdated narratives and traditional thinking, the wrong guy got the Finals MVP trophy. If this video changed how you think about the 1996 Finals, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into basketball history that challenge everything you think you know about the game. And let me know in the comments, what other obvious basketball narratives do you think I should investigate next? Because sometimes the best stories are hiding in plain sight.